Today, we are gazing up at the moon, not just, reminiscing about the glory days, but measuring future ambitions against maybe the highest possible benchmark, the past itself. Our mission for this deep dive is to tackle a challenge, really a philosophical and strategic one that pops up in the sources you've shared. How do you define the next step in lunar exploration so that it feels genuinely progressive, truly valuable, and crucially not just an expensive, nostalgic rerun of what we already did, half a century ago? And here's the core finding that really frames this whole discussion. It's pulled directly from your research, the piece on lunar science-based imperatives. It states very clearly, a permanently crewed lunar science base would be far more impressive than a repeat of what was already done incredibly well by Apollo in 1969.
Right. And what's immediately striking about that is how it gives absolute unreserved credit to history. Apollo was done incredibly well, no question, a monumental achievement. But, by praising the past so highly, the source effectively establishes that technical perfection back in 1969. Well, that's now the floor. It's the absolute starting point for today's goals. If you aren't aiming for something demonstrably greater than Apollo, this view suggests you're essentially wasting time and resources.
Yeah, I find that framing so compelling. It really forces us to appreciate just how high that historical bar actually is. So let's start by looking back at that achievement, that Apollo benchmark, as you put it. We often forget the sheer difficulty involved back then.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
easy to gloss over the historical context now. Apollo wasn't just a technical success. It was, frankly, a societal miracle driven by an almost impossible deadline. It established, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that humanity could successfully engineer this incredibly complex high-stakes mission, get to the lunar surface, do stuff, and get home safe. That proof of capability, the ability to just execute, that was the ultimate goal back then.
And the sources acknowledge this wasn't just done, but done incredibly well. We forget, the logistics.
Yeah.
Navigating with computers less powerful than, a modern toaster oven. That success sets a precedent that makes any subsequent mission automatically subject to, harsh comparison.
Totally. But here's the crucial distinction the source implies, I think.
Yeah.
Apollo proves the how. Future missions, in order to qualify as real progress in this view, are being judged on the why and, perhaps most importantly, the for how long. Apollo was transient, it was a spectacular visit. But the moment you've proven you can visit, well, repeating that feat, even with slicker tech, doesn't actually demonstrate true progress in the eyes of this research. It's just doing the same thing again, maybe better.
Okay, that brings us right to the core challenge then, moving from a spectacular visit to something genuinely far more impressive. I want to focus on the specific language defining that next step in the quote, a permanently crewed lunar science base. What happens when we unpack that phrase? What's really hiding in there?
Right, we can synthesize the implied differences right there.
Yeah.
If Apollo was the high-water mark for a temporary visit, what makes this proposed base a true leap? We basically move from transient capability to sustained utility. That's the jump.
Okay, let's break down the first part of that shift you mentioned, duration. We're moving from minutes and days on the surface to months, years.
Yeah, duration is the first and maybe the most challenging hurdle. Apollo missions were defined by their limitation, a few days max on the surface, right? Dictated by life support, power constraints. The phrase permanently crewed implies sustained, long-term, possibly continuous human operations and habitation. Just think about what that demands. Technically and logistically, it's enormous.
It's not just surviving the trip anymore. It's like building actual real estate infrastructure on the moon.
Precisely. You shift from carrying everything you need, power, air, water, from Earth, for just a few days, to establishing systems that can support crew rotations, potentially indefinitely. This is where the engineering complexity just skyrockets. Apollo needed, high-performance batteries and fuel cells for short bursts, a permanent base that needs reliable, long-term power generation. We're talking probably small-scale nuclear or maybe vast solar arrays coupled with serious energy storage, and the systems have to be self-repairing or at least maintainable over years, not just days. Big difference.
Okay, so duration is one huge leap. And the second difference you pointed to focuses entirely on the purpose. Apollo achieved exploration. The future goal specifies a science base. It sounds like we're moving from symbolic presence, the flags and footprints part, to continuous dedicated work.
That's the elevation in scope, exactly. A science base suggests dedicated labs, continuous seismic monitoring, maybe astronomical observatories shielded by the moon itself. Uninterrupted data collection. Apollo brought back priceless samples, absolutely. But those were snapshots in time. A permanent base allows for long-duration experiments. Watching how rock samples change over time when exposed, monitoring radiation effects on materials and, crucially, humans. running experiments that might require months or even years to complete. The utility phase is all about the continuous delivery of high-value scientific output.
So if you're the listener processing this, the key takeaway here is that the true measure of impressive achievement has shifted. It's moved from proving we can get there to
Right.
establishing that we sort of belong there and that we are generating continuous scientific value that justifies the immense investment. Is that fair?
That's the essence, I think. We are past this pure capability phase and into the utility phase. Success is explicitly tied not just to being there, but to sustained human presence, driving sophisticated scientific output. The difference between Apollo's flags and footprints and a permanent base. It's like the difference between camping out for a weekend versus building a functioning off-world research institute. Fundamentally different.
That distinction leads us directly to the ultimate question, really, raised in the sources, avoiding the repeat.
Hmm.
Why would simply repeating Apollo, even if we did it cheaper and faster with, say, reusable rockets, why would that be considered insufficient? Or even a failure to progress? I mean, efficiency and lower cost is still progress, right, in some ways.
Well, yes and no. It is progress in rocketry, sure, but it's not necessarily progress in humanity's overall capability in space. The sources really challenge the idea that just efficiency is enough. If the only goal is to land 2 people, gather a few rocks, plant a flag, and come home after 3 days, well, you've already done that in 1969. Doing it cheaper only answers the same fundamental question Apollo answered 50 years ago. It doesn't answer the pressing new questions about actually living and working off-world long-term.
Ah, okay. So the only way to avoid the repeat then is to overcome hurdles Apollo never even had to consider because it was so short term.
Precisely. This is where we define what makes the base far more impressive. It's the mastery of systems that enable permanence. Apollo only needed to survive the trip there and back. A permanent base has to solve at least 3 sort of non-negotiable hurdles that really define this new era of capability.
Okay, lay them out for us. Give us the first one. What's the biggest logistical shift required for permanent habitation?
The primary shift, I'd say, is closed-loop life support. Apollo used open-loop systems. They brought everything they needed, oxygen, water, food, and basically dumped the waste. Very straightforward for a short trip. A permanent base just cannot afford that massive logistical umbilical cord back to Earth. To be truly permanent, or even just sustainable long-term, you must recycle air and water with near-perfect efficiency. That's a feat we haven't fully mastered even on the International Space Station without regular major resupply missions. Mastering a truly closed-loop system is a foundational technological achievement far, far beyond Apollo's scope.
Wow, okay. That is a massive leap in bioengineering right there. What's the second hurdle then that differentiates a real base from just a visit?
In situ resource utilization, usually called ISRU. Apollo simply brought and used resources from Earth. A base must learn to utilize the moon's own resources. We're talking about extracting oxygen from the lunar regolith, the soil, for breathable air, and maybe even rocket fuel. Potentially even smelting metals from the rocks for construction or repairs. If you have to launch every single drop of water and every kilogram of oxygen from Earth, the base is economically unsustainable, almost by definition, and therefore not truly permanent in a practical sense. ISRU is the key that unlocks true autonomy, which Apollo explicitly never needed.
Okay, so if Apollo is about the technological proof of concept for the trip, the base is about the technological proof of autonomy once you're there.
And that leads directly to the third major hurdle, radiation protection. Apollo crews were only exposed to the harsh space radiation environment for a matter of days. That limited their long-term dose.
Yeah.
But a permanently crewed base, especially one lasting for months and years, well, that requires substantial permanent shielding against solar flares and those nasty galactic cosmic rays. This almost certainly means deep subsurface habitats or structures built from thick layers of lunar regolith. Building safe, long-term underground infrastructure. That's a fundamental requirement for permanence that elevates the challenge far beyond Apollo's temporary, fairly lightweight protection scheme.
That makes the distinction incredibly clear. The sources are basically arguing that if the goal isn't to deliver mastery over these really difficult new hurdles, closed loops, ISRU, permanent shielding, then the mission is fundamentally only repeating the success of the past, just maybe with newer technology. It doesn't actually advance the overall capability of humanity in space. It would be, like you said, a flashy, modern reenactment maybe, but not a true step forward.
Exactly. The measure of success for any current lunar project, from this perspective, must exceed that original technological proof of concept. It has to deliver that permanent scientific capacity and that sustained human presence. That permanence is what differentiates it. And it's the necessary requirement for being far more impressive than Apollo.
This has been a really fascinating way to frame current space ambitions. The bar isn't just get back to the moon. The sources make it pretty clear that the bar is establish genuine autonomy and continuous science there. The definition of success has really shifted from visiting the moon to living and working on the moon.
That's a powerful summary. And you see how that phrase, incredibly well done describing Apollo, actually serves to highlight the deficiency of aiming any lower than permanence today. It sets the stage perfectly.
So if we accept that permanence, utility, and these autonomous technologies are now the definition of success, the criteria for being far more impressive, it raises an important final question for you, the listener, to consider as you digest all this material.
Right. If success is now defined by demonstrating sustained viability through mastering these new technologies, ISRU, closed-loop systems, permanent radiation shielding, what fundamental economic shift must also occur? Think about it. If the base is truly permanent, must we move beyond relying solely on government budgets? Must we demonstrate a viable, maybe even self-sustaining economic model for lunar activities? That was never part of Apollo's mandate, of course. But maybe that's the challenge that truly takes us fully out of the 1960s mindset and propels us into the future of lunar presence. Something to think about.